Putin's 3-decade strategy for controlling Moldova relied on a simple but brutally effective formula: keep the country energy dependent, maintain a frozen conflict on its territory, and ensure that its roads, railways, and trade routes all pointed east. Gas came from Moscow. Electricity flowed from the Cuciurgan power plant in Transnistria. Every crisis forced Chisinau to knock on the Kremlin's door. This system persisted because Moldova had no alternative. The bridges across the Prut River were few. Rail lines were incompatible due to different track gauges. Border crossings were bureaucratic nightmares that could take hours. The Soviet Union had deliberately designed Moldova's infrastructure to face east, and for 30 years after independence, that design held. The Kremlin weaponized this isolation. Repeatedly, Moscow restricted gas supplies in the middle of winter, bringing Moldova to the brink of freezing. Most recently, in early 2025, it cut off deliveries to Transnistria entirely, hoping to plunge both the breakaway region and the rest of Moldova into a cascading energy crisis. The message was always the same: turn away from the European path, or your people will freeze. But this time, the blackmail failed. Instead of yielding, Romania and Moldova decided to bypass Russia completely. Now, new bridges are rising over the Prut. Trains are running on railways that have been silent for 30 years. Moldova's trade routes are shifting westward, quietly, irreversibly, and at a pace that Moscow can no longer control. Ionel Scrioșu, State Secretary at the Romanian Ministry of Transport, outlined the scale of this transformation in a May 3, 2026 interview with Moldpress. We want to build at least one road bridge to every Moldovan district along the Prut River, connecting all 11 border districts to Romania, he said. This is not merely an infrastructure project. It is a geopolitical revolution dressed in concrete and steel. To understand the magnitude of what is unfolding, one must first examine Moldova's current geography. Only 6 of the 11 border districts have land connections to Romania. The remaining 5 districts, nearly half of Moldova's western frontier, are physically severed. There is no bridge. There is no crossing. The isolation is total. This arrangement was no accident. The Soviet Union structured the Moldavian SSR as a captive entity. Railways were built to connect to Ukraine and Russia, not to Romania. Energy lines ran from Moscow, not Bucharest. Trade was forced through Transnistria and onto Soviet corridors. The western gates were deliberately bolted shut. In 1940, Stalin annexed Romanian-speaking Bessarabia, merged it with the left bank of the Dniester, and created the Moldavian SSR. Though the overwhelming majority of the population was ethnically and linguistically Romanian, the physical separation from Romania was engineered to be absolute. 35 years after the Soviet collapse, that legacy endured, until now. Romania is now dismantling the Soviet inheritance, and it is doing so with European Union funding. The scale of the undertaking is staggering. The most symbolic first step is the Flowers Bridge at Ungheni, the first highway standard bridge over the Prut in 60 years. Construction began in April 2025. By mid-2026, it is half complete, with a scheduled opening in 2027. This is no ordinary river crossing. It will connect directly to Romania's main highway network and through it, integrate Moldova into the European motorway system for the first time in history. 4 additional bridges are on the way, all financed by EU grants, all due for completion between 2026 and 2027. Existing border checkpoints are also being completely overhauled. Instead of 2 separate customs procedures, on either side of the river, controls will be unified at a single point. Crossing times will be cut by half. Yet the true quiet revolution is unfolding on the rails. On April 22, 2026, a moment of profound historical significance occurred. For the first time in 3 decades, a train crossed from Moldova into Romania without stopping to change its wheel sets. To grasp why this matters, one must understand the Soviet track gauge. While most of Europe uses standard gauge, the Soviet Union adopted a broader gauge, deliberately incompatible, so that rolling stock could not easily move west. Every time a Moldovan train reached the border, it had to halt for hours while its bogies were swapped. Time and money bled away at every crossing. That obstacle is now being systematically removed. Moldovan trains can soon travel directly onto European tracks without interruption. The electrification of the main Iași-Ungheni line will be completed within a year and a half. Where previously access from Moldova to Romania was possible through only 3 points, direct connections will soon be available from both the north and the south. In October 2025, the 2 countries opened their first joint customs control center. The border no longer functions as the dividing line between 2 separate states, but as a single synchronized crossing point. The economic ramifications of these projects are immediate and profound. Moldovan goods can now reach European markets directly via the Romanian port of Constanța, one of the largest ports on the Black Sea and the primary eastern gateway to the European Union. Previously, Moldova's exports were funneled through routes dependent on Ukraine and Russia. The war in Ukraine had already placed those corridors under enormous strain and existential risk. Direct access through Constanța liberates Moldova from this vulnerability. In March 2026, Romania permitted Moldovan goods to be transported to the port without special permits, and a raft of additional bureaucratic barriers are being eliminated. Over 60% of Moldova's exports already flow to the EU market. The new bridges and railways will push that share even higher, effectively weaving Moldova's economy into the fabric of European supply chains. The EU has provided over $2.2 billion in funding to Moldova over the past 4 years. These infrastructure projects are the physical embodiment of that investment. It is precisely here that the strategic danger for Putin crystallizes. For 30 years, the Russian Federation controlled Moldova through 3 instruments: energy blackmail, the Transnistrian card, and logistical dependence. Now all 3 are being neutralized simultaneously. The energy weapon has already been broken. The most recent Kremlin attempt came in January 2025, when Moscow cut off gas supplies to Transnistria entirely. The objective was to leave both the breakaway region and the government in Chisinau helpless in midwinter cold. But Moldova was ready. Romania stepped in immediately, supplying gas and electricity to cover the shortfall. The Moldova-Romania electricity interconnectors were expanded, and Moldova accelerated its integration into the NTSO-E European grid. Over the past 4 years, Moscow has attempted to manufacture an energy crisis 3 times. It has failed 3 times. Each failure deepened Moldova's reliance on Romania and further devalued the Kremlin's energy card. Now, the new bridges and railways are adding the logistical foundation to this energy independence. Moldova can bypass Russia not just in energy, but in trade, transportation, and the everyday movement of its people. Putin's quietest and most effective weapon, logistical dependence, is being rendered inert. Moldova's decades-long confinement to Soviet-era eastern corridors is ending, and its trade routes are pivoting permanently toward the west. Russia's third instrument, the frozen conflict in Transnistria, is also receding under the weight of these developments. Transnistria is legally Moldovan territory, but it has existed since 1992 as a Moscow-backed separatist entity. A short but bloody war ended with a ceasefire, and Russia has maintained roughly 1,500 troops there ever since, calling them a peacekeeping force. Moldova calls them an illegal occupation force. Alongside these troops sits a massive Soviet ammunition depot at Kabazna, containing some 20,000 tons of munitions, the largest stockpile of its kind in Eastern Europe. Much of this arsenal is old, unstable, and poses a constant risk of accidental explosion. But Russia has long used it as both a military foothold and an instrument of geopolitical blackmail, with the implicit warning, touch it, and it will detonate. Putin's Transnistria strategy has always been transparent. The frozen conflict exists to slow Moldova's EU accession, block any prospect of unification with Romania, and keep the threat of renewed civil war permanently alive. But the new infrastructure projects are scrambling that calculus. As bridges and railways bind Moldova ever more tightly to the west, Transnistria's Russia-dependent economy is becoming increasingly marginal. Free gas subsidies were cut. The Cuciurgan power plant's importance has diminished. The region's industries are collapsing. The figures are stark. In 2008, Transnistria's exports to Russia peaked at $253 million. By 2024, that number had collapsed to just $21 million. Over the same period, Transnistrian exports to the European Union exceeded $380 million. Many Transnistrian firms have adapted their production to meet European standards in order to maintain access to the EU market. In other words, economic reality has shifted westward long before the political rhetoric caught up. Political cracks are widening too. In the 2025 parliamentary elections, 30% of Transnistria's electorate voted for the pro-European PAS party. The war in Ukraine has further eroded Russia's position. Although Moscow's forces occupied parts of southeastern Ukraine, their failure to capture Odessa derailed any hope of establishing a land bridge to Transnistria. Russian troops stationed there are now isolated. Their supply lines are severed. They can receive no reinforcements. Analysts describe the situation as the gradual erosion of Transnistria, and Romania's infrastructure projects are accelerating this erosion beyond anything Moscow can counter. There's a further dimension to these infrastructure projects, and it is likely the one that disturbs the Kremlin most deeply. Ostensibly civilian in nature, the new bridges and railways are designed to NATO standards. Their load capacities, road widths, and rail specifications are suitable for the passage of heavy military equipment. This creates, for the first time, the realistic possibility of rapid military reinforcement into Moldova from Romania. Integrated with the A8 highway, these routes would enable the transfer of armored vehicles, personnel, and logistical supplies within hours if the need arose. Presently, such a transfer takes days. Russia's 1,500 troops in Transnistria are already in a state of de facto isolation due to the war in Ukraine. In 2022, the Kremlin's plan was to capture Odessa and drive a land corridor straight to Transnistria. That plan collapsed. The new infrastructure makes the isolation permanent. As Moldova's western connections strengthen, Chisinau's ability to project control over Transnistria increases. Moldova's initiation of the process to leave the Commonwealth of Independent States in 2026 further diminishes Russia's institutional footprint. Moscow is being left with neither an institutional framework nor functional logistical routes through which to exert leverage over Moldova. This quiet integration of Romania and Moldova effectively extends the NATO-EU security line all the way to the Dniester River. Romania already forms one of the most critical pillars of NATO's southeastern flank. The Mihail Kogolnicianu Air Base hosts the largest U.S. military facility in the Black Sea region. Now, through bridges and railways, that security umbrella is extending outward towards Moldova. Putin's frozen conflict model, his go-to instrument for locking post-Soviet states into perpetual instability, is physically unraveling. How, then, does this integration affect Moldova's EU accession? President Maia Sandu faces three possible pathways, each carrying distinct risks. The first is to advance EU membership while excluding Transnistria, following the Cyprus model. Cyprus joined the EU in 2004, despite a Turkish-backed breakaway state controlling one-third of the island. EU law was suspended in the occupied north. Moldova could pursue a similar course, join the Union with just the right bank of the Dniester, while Transnistria remains in legal limbo. This is the fastest route, but it risks leaving Transnistria as a gray zone, a vacuum in which Russia could continue to maneuver. The second option is to pursue EU membership and Transnistria's reintegration simultaneously. This is the most comprehensive solution, but it would give Moscow a powerful incentive to sabotage the process. A leaked FSB document from 2023 revealed that Russian security services had drafted a detailed strategy to counter Moldova's influence in Transnistria. The Kremlin is prepared for this fight. The third option, and the one many analysts consider the most realistic, is to prioritize EU membership while quietly continuing Transnistria's economic integration. Concrete steps, not grand political declarations, bridges, railways, energy lines, trade agreements. Romania's infrastructure projects are effectively putting this third scenario into practice, step by step, without the need for rhetorical confrontation. Official EU accession negotiations began in 2024. Bilateral screening sessions were completed in 2025. Officials aim to sign the accession agreement by 2028. Sandu's victory in the September 2025 parliamentary elections, in which her PAS party secured 50.2% of the vote, gave the process strong democratic legitimacy. But the road ahead is not smooth. Moldovan analyst Ian Lisnevsky warns, the EU does not accept countries as they are. It accepts systems that are governable, predictable, institutionally stable, and free of conflict. Today, 51% of Moldova's population does not trust the European Union. The root cause is not integration itself, but a lack of trust in their own government. 68% find the use of EU issues in election campaigns divisive. Sandu's explicit mention of the possibility of unification with Romania is also stirring debate. She told French media that unification would greatly accelerate EU integration, but analyst Victor Ciobanu considers this inappropriate in the current political climate, given that support for unification stands at only around 30%. Lisnevsky is blunter. Unification with Romania would not lead to EU membership. On the contrary, it could delay it. The EU doesn't operate on a merge and automatically become a member principle. This isn't a legal mechanism, it's a politically complex scenario. Such a step would intensify internal polarization, generate geopolitical tensions, and make the country less predictable, precisely the opposite of what Brussels looks for in a candidate state. But whatever the political debate, a deeper truth is already asserting itself. The bridges, the railways, and the energy lines are speaking louder than any political speech. Actual integration is moving faster than the political debates about integration, and this may be the most important point of all. It is true that Romania's financial difficulties and political uncertainties could slow some projects, but EU funds mitigate that risk. The money comes from Brussels, not from Bucharest's national budget. The logistical blueprint has already been funded, sanctioned, and set into motion. When viewed through the widest strategic lens, the Romania-Moldova silent revolution is not simply a bilateral infrastructure program. It is a move that is redrawing the balance of power across the entire Black Sea region. Putin's grand regional strategy was erected on three pillars: invade and subjugate Ukraine, control Moldova through a frozen conflict, and establish unchallenged Russian dominance over the Black Sea. As the war in Ukraine enters its fourth year, the first pillar has already crumbled. Russia failed to capture Odessa. The Black Sea Fleet has suffered catastrophic losses, and its once presumed naval dominance has largely evaporated. Now, the second pillar, Moldova, is collapsing as well. These two failures are not disconnected, they are feeding into each other. As Russian power in the Black Sea wanes, the Kremlin's tools for pressuring Moldova diminish, As Moldova drifts closer to the west, Russia's strategic depth along the northern Black Sea coast narrows. Every new bridge further erodes the Soviet logistical inheritance. Every new railway line binds Moldova a little closer to Europe. Every additional energy interconnector reduces Russia's leverage a little more. And Transnistria, Putin's last stronghold in Moldova, is transforming from a strategic asset into a strategic liability. Maintaining a separatist enclave with isolated troops, a collapsing economy, a population increasingly oriented toward the west, and severed logistics is growing more expensive for Moscow with each passing year. The cost of Moldova's integration is estimated at $500 to $620 million annually. For Moldova and the EU, this is an investment. For Russia, sustaining Transnistria is an increasingly unsustainable drain. The energy leverage is broken. Moldova now receives gas and electricity through Romania. Logistical dependence is being dismantled. New bridges and railways bypass Soviet-era corridors. Transnistria is being gradually isolated, its economy already turned westward, its population voting with its feet toward Europe. The Russian military contingent sits stranded without a land bridge. The EU accession process is moving forward, and every new bridge accelerates that process a little further. All of this is unfolding without fanfare. There are no dramatic declarations of victory, no direct provocations aimed at Moscow. As one observer in Romania put it, we must work toward unification, and the most important step is reconnecting Bessarabia to Europe's transportation and energy networks. It can be done. This, perhaps, is the most quietly devastating aspect of the entire project. Without triggering a major political crisis, without directly challenging the Kremlin in a way that would invite a disproportionate response, the reality on the ground is being altered irrevocably. Moscow can protest, it can threaten, it can spread disinformation, but you cannot protest a bridge. You cannot threaten a railway line into non-existence. You cannot stop a unified customs checkpoint with a disinformation campaign. For 30 years, Putin controlled Moldova through a frozen conflict, but frozen things do not stay frozen forever. The new bridges over the Prut are taking this thaw to a point of no return. The geography that Stalin engineered, the infrastructure that Moscow weaponized, the isolation that held Moldova captive for generations. All of it is being dismantled, one concrete span at a time. And at the end of this quiet revolution, Putin will find that his last stronghold on Moldova's territory has not been conquered by an army, but erased by a bridge.